I'm sorry if your feelings get hurt about us raising this issue. I see you were almost breaking down a few minutes ago when you were talking about slide number 33, slide number 31. That's not the intent, and it's certainly, I'm surprised to see that reaction from an experienced expert such as yourself. So I apologize for that.
I accept your apology, but the idea of after working really hard 15 years to develop a credible reputation and being told watching on a Zoom that I am tainting the jury pool and poisoning the jury pool and contaminating the jury pool by doing what's required and standard, I'm not crying. I'm angry.
Okay.
And yes, it doesn't matter.
And please go ahead and be as angry as you like as you continue your work for the defense in this case. It is a fact, though, that you don't know of the 400 citizens that were questioned on this survey. You don't know which ones of them did not already previously know any of the fact-specific representations in your questions. Isn't that true?
I do know because they answered yes or no to the question.
No. Oh, well, okay. Before you asked the question, you didn't know that. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And so somebody who hadn't heard the representation in that one slide that you acknowledged was false. Let's see. You acknowledged false that Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims. That's false. You know that to be false.
Which one?
That Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims.
Yes, I was trying not to say that because.
But you knew that was false.
I did.
Yes. And so you have now, for anybody who had never heard that before, that question is now planted into them, unqualified representation that Mr. Kohberger stalked one of the witnesses, and that's false.
That's false. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. And just to follow up on that, early on in your testimony, you testified, I want to make sure that we heard this correctly, that inadmissible or false information can be the most prejudicial information.
It can be.
Yes. And your surveyors put that false information into the minds of people who were asked that question who may not have previously heard it. Correct.
Correct. Relative
Thank
to
you.
the media.
Thank you.
It's mentioned it hundreds and thousands of times.
And just make sure we're clear too. Around the same time in your testimony, I believe you testified that you don't care if the information that you put in your specific questions to the people being surveyed is correct. That you said that, didn't you?
Right. I don't know what you mean by correct.
True or false?
I care about whether or not it's proliferated by the media.
You don't care if it's true.
No, I don't. I don't care about is it prejudicial.
So it's okay to taint people who had never heard that information before for the end result of identifying others who have and might have bias. Is that a fair statement?
I'm going to object to the questions.
He can answer
He's
the question.
badgering.
Wait.
Let me finish my objection.
Yeah, there's an objection.
He's badgering the witness. He's misstating his testimony, and I object.
The witness testified you didn't care if the information was correct, Judge.
Yeah, overruled. So,
May I
so just
No, that's okay.
one person can talk at a time. And, let's take down the tone a little bit.
Yes, sir. Okay, just so we're clear, the questions, fact-specific questions were propounded to people who were taking the survey, did not, after asking the question even, qualify the false facts as saying this may or may not be true, or this is actually a false fact. The survey didn't tell them that what they might have heard was false.
First of all, I don't call them facts because they're media items. And then second of all, that would be ridiculous. And no, I wouldn't do that in a survey. Are you suggesting I follow up? Have you read, seen, or heard if he stalked? And oh, by the way, if you know that, let me tell you, it's not true.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, because isn't that exactly what happens in the voir dire process?
No.
Absolutely it does.
Your Honor, I'm going to object, argumentative.
Okay, yeah, you don't get to testify exactly about that, so I'll sustain you.
Dr. Edelman, have you participated as an attorney in voir dire in Idaho under Idaho laws?
Have I what?
Have you participated as an attorney in voir dire, conducted voir dire in a criminal case in Idaho?
No, I haven't.
And just to be clear, because in two places, at the beginning and at the end of your testimony and your PowerPoint, this PowerPoint, you created that as Ms. Taylor. So you adopt what the contents of the PowerPoint speaks.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just to be clear, not every fact-specific question that your surveyors asked came directly from the probable cause affidavit. Isn't that true?
Well, to be clear, they're not facts. They're media items.
They're representations
Your
of
Honor,
fact
I'm going to object.
in the PC
And
affidavit.
Wait a minute, hold on.
I'm objecting and ask that he allow Dr. Edelman to complete his answer before he jumps back in.
They're simple yes or no questions.
What was your question?
Oh, yeah. Let's just say, one at a time, okay? Listen to him answer, and we'll be through at some point.
Thank you. So, Dr. Edelman, isn't it true that there are among the 9 fact-specific questions, that's my characterization of the 9 questions, we know which ones we're talking about. Not all of the representations in those questions came from the probable cause affidavit. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And are you aware that under Idaho law, probable cause affidavits in criminal cases become open to the public by operation of court rule once person is arrested and appears in court?
I'm sure that's true. I'm just not used to having press conferences to tell the media to disseminate the information far and wide.
Oh, so let's talk about that. That press conference was made prior to Mr. Kohberger's appearance, prior to the release of the affidavit, and the press conference only referred the media to what would be part of the official court record. Isn't that true?
I don't know. All I heard was this is going to be released. I encourage you to tell your listeners and viewers and anybody who's interested in the truth.
By going to the court record and looking at the probable cause affidavit. Isn't that true?
I recall you saying, I want you to go to the court record and look at the probable cause affidavit. And what it did was
You're splitting hairs and hairs now, doctor. That's fine. I don't have any other questions.
Okay.
Thank you. So, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to start with the probable cause affidavit, and I think you testified that that probable cause affidavit was spread far and wide in the media over and over again. Do you recall that?
Let me be clear. It wasn't the probable cause affidavit that was spread far and wide. It was details taken from it, put in media stories with editorial comments back and forth in the context of news stories. It wasn't, here's a document from the government that was in the court record. Let me read it to you. That's not how it works. It's media coverage. That's how it's reported. Taken out of there, DNA stuff, all the other stuff in there, reported within the context of a news story.
So the news takes this document, takes things from it, and runs with it, spins with it, changes it, talks about it, and sends it out.
Yes.
Sometimes, do you think the media gets it wrong after they read something?
Sorry, what?
Does the media ever get it wrong after they read something?
Yes.
And do those stories have any less prejudice on somebody's, on the reader of that media, whether they're wrong or not?
No, and going back to, I don't care if it's true or not, my focus is to assess whether or not media coverage is prejudicial, and whether or not it's led to opinions. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. You don't say, well, I won't test all this prejudicial stuff in the media because it's not true, so I won't include it in the survey, and I'll just assume that it had no impact on people. I find it convenient to be able to disseminate a whole bunch of prejudicial media coverage, saturate the community, and then say, oh, you have no right to test the impact of that information on the jury pool. So it's wonderful that you get the benefit of generating all the bias by releasing it to the media and then saying, no, you're constrained defense. You're not allowed to ask questions about it because that stuff's not true. Or you might have told one person in the jury pool a detail they didn't know. Oh, they knew the other 7 details that are highly prejudicial, but it was that one that shifted everything, and that's going to lead to the contamination. Not the thousands of newspaper stories, not the media coverage, not the stuff on social media. It was because a survey vendor called 400 people and asked a question that one person or 2 people in that panel or whatever it was in that 400 may not have known that one detail. They knew everything else. They're already biased, but it was because they learned that one detail. That's what shifted the scales. That to me is just ridiculous.
And if somebody said, I don't know anything about this case, did you stop?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson was talking to you about the difference between, in the survey, between closed questions and what can happen in voir dire.
Yes.
You're not an attorney, is that correct?
Correct.
Well, what's the difference between what you can do in a survey and what you can do in voir dire as far as your expertise?
Well, again, I sit in jury selections. I've done hundreds of them. I've done research on voir dire transcripts. I've done post-trial interviews for hundreds of times. So I have a pretty good idea of how the process works. In a survey, I can ask those case-specific media items. Well, someone says, I just recall what was in the newspaper to the open. I can ask a follow-up. Have you recently heard if David Nichols was convicted by a jury for murder? Could never do that in a voir dire because you'd be poisoning the well, just like in the John Fight case we mentioned. I rarely see during voir dire somebody admits comments on something like, oh, I read this. And then there's a whole discussion and explaining to everybody, well, that's not really true. That fact was just in social media. It's wrong. That is not a normal common thing that I've seen in voir dire.
In your experience, 15 years, you said, doing this work, have you had a situation where you've been stopped midway through your process?
No.
What do you care about?
What's what?
What do you care about? I've heard you say that whether what the media sends out there, whether all of those things are actually true or whether it's a spin off other information, that's not what's important to you. What do you care about in your work?
What I'm interested in is assessing if there's prejudicial media coverage. Inadmissible prejudicial media coverage is some of the most concerning. Misinformation is some of the most concerning. What I care about is what extent of that stuff has permeated the jury pool. What do people know? And do those specific details generate bias, prejudgment? Again, the idea that there can be all this stuff out in the public that's misinformation, prejudicial, that benefits one side, and you're not allowed to ask if people know that detail because you might taint one person who already knows a whole bunch of information. But that, again, like knowing the detail about the stalking comment. Okay, that person knows all this stuff, but that's the thing that's going to change everything. And now that person's poisoned because they heard it in a survey. But the fact that there's thousands of newspaper articles and television stories and comments on social media, 80% of people in this community have talked about this case according to the survey. None of that matters. It's because I did a survey and asked that question. I mean, that's just, I don't even know what to say.
You still want to finish the surveys if we're allowed to do them right?
I'm sorry?
Will you still do the surveys if we're allowed to do them right?
Yes, if we're doing them correctly, I'm open to continuing. Now, I think this whole thing has created quite a whole new narrative that it's almost wrong that the defense is doing something inappropriate by doing the same standard survey that's been done hundreds of times in other cases, including in Idaho. So I don't know how people will respond because of all of this and what it's generated, but I would certainly try if we're doing the survey correctly.
Thank you. I don't have any questions.